You know, when you think of a small town, especially in an agriculture area, you kind of have a general understanding of what that looks like. You know, horses, cows, that sort of look and feel. We kind of break that mold of what people envision. We're really proud of the fact that we took the steps to move towards that goal of being Canada's first net zero community electrically. We offset everything that we consume and need for electricity by our solar panels. So everything from our street lighting, all of our buildings, our ice arena, our theater, our library, every single thing that we need that needs electricity is now powered entirely by solar electricity. Especially when you're outside of Alberta, they don't think about a small community like us being net zero. They think of that being somewhere out east or something like that. I've talked to a lot of people about Raymond becoming the first net zero municipality in Canada, and it often comes with a very large surprise. The first municipality in Canada is in Alberta, of all places. Yeah, it is.
We're at Victoria Sports Park. So right now we're just walking up to the top of our sports fields complex bleachers, and we're going to be able to have a nice shot of looking at phase 1 and phase 2 of our solar municipal initiative. The solar array that was actually put on the buildings was part of phase 1, and that's generating enough electricity to offset all the consumption that's being housed within the buildings, but also with the stadium lighting that we have here. Phase 2, which is the carport structure, which you can see just off to the right here, is actually offsetting all of our municipal streetlights and any other connection in town where we're drawing power off the grid. And so that installation of the carport structure has allowed us to be municipally net zero electrically for our operations, because it's been able to make up that difference. In 2014, Council gave us the directive to really look after any and all available provincial grant funding programs. I got a contractor to come, and as part of that, they said they'd do a solar assessment on our facilities, and we said, sure, we'd love that. The initial response back said, actually, there's really no good site in Raymond for solar. And so we thought, well, that doesn't make sense to us, but you're the expert, so we'll take your word for it. And we kind of let it go for a few years, but a neighboring community, the town of Cardston, actually established a few solar projects within Cardston, and we thought to ourselves, well, if it works in Cardston, it really should work here. And so we reached out to them and asked, you know, who they used and kind of the basics on that. It's kind of grown to the point where we are now one of the, or if not the first municipality in Canada that's offset our municipal operations completely with solar electricity.
Projects like this need a lot of money. This project was about $2.8 million, and we were able to get about $630,000 of that from the province, from the Municipal Climate Action Change Centre. The project is sized essentially financially that offsets our consumption charges. So right now it's for us financially net zero. We anticipate, based on our history and based on the cost of the project, that we're still cash neutral for about 15 years. But then in 15 years, when the whole thing is paid off, that's when we start really hitting the sweet money, because we're able to then generate enough for all of our facilities, not have any bills, hopefully. But hopefully we're generating more than we need by reducing some of our other consumption areas and sell that back to the grid. Every municipality has an opportunity to make a decision what's best for the future of their community.
Alberta is probably tied with Saskatchewan for being the best place to put solar up in the country. For any panel that you put up, you're producing more in Alberta than almost anywhere else in Canada. And it compares well against some of the more impressive jurisdictions you can think of globally in terms of the amount of solar energy. Can we produce as much as Arizona? No, but the amount of sun that we have in some parts of the province are comparable to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So some shocking statistics that way.
I tend to look at it as, Alberta's this place has been blessed with a lot of natural resources in the energy space. dinosaurs died here and gave us a lot of fossil fuels today, but we also have some of the best wind resources in Canada, at least in terms of capacity factors, so the amount of wind that blows. So that's just simply the factor of it coming careening off the Rocky Mountains. It really gives a lot of wind, so in turn it means it's low cost. And we also have some of the best insolation, so the solar capacity factor. It's just the amount of sunshine we have in southern Alberta. So it's sort of this embarrassment of riches. We have all the fossil fuel resources, but we have the best renewable resources too.
Well, there is a big push, I think, for renewables. Certainly we're seeing more big solar farms, right? We're seeing more wind farms. We're seeing more research being done into geothermal and into hydrogen.
We talk about the growth in renewables in Alberta. It's a couple things. We have what's called a deregulated electricity market. So that means, it's an open market. Anybody can come in with the proper qualifications and sell electricity. That makes us different from most of Canada, but actually similar to a lot of the US. There are many states that are like that.
Our electricity in Alberta, being predominantly fossil fuel generated, puts us in line with really only Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia in terms of our complement of electricity coming from fossil energy. And the rest of the provinces are majority either renewables, mostly hydro, or nuclear, certainly in Ontario.
We right now have about 50 or 60% of the electricity is coming from coal in Alberta, and that's even a change in the last few years. It used to be somewhere between 70 and 80% of the electricity was generated from coal in Alberta. We now have policies in place that will phase out our entire coal fleet in 10 years. So we're going to go from a system that was 80% or so coal down to zero by 2030.
The 30% by 2030 is actually a legislated requirement that they have not repealed. So presumably we will attain that.
But then there's also just an economic piece as well too. And so as other places around the world have deployed more and more renewables, the cost of those renewables have come down really dramatically. And so, now on a kind of kilowatt hour basis, the cheapest new source of electricity generation in the province is wind.
In wind in particular, some of the major gains have just been the materials science that has actually allowed us to make huge, huge machines. I think the easiest way to understand a wind turbine is basically just an airplane propeller in reverse. So instead of having a propeller that's pulling the plane, you have the wind which is turning the propeller. Many mechanical machines, if you operate them in reverse, will have, so a motor becomes a generator, for example. The same principle is sort of broadly true for wind turbines. So it's you're just extracting kinetic energy in the wind and turning that, there's a gearbox inside the turbine itself, and you're turning that into electricity. The big challenge for wind, for any renewables, is that we can't control it. The wind shows up when it wants to, and it dies when it wants to. And so integrating that and managing that into the broader system is an ongoing challenge, and that's where there's a lot of research going on these days, in particular because wind and now solar are becoming incredibly cheap. And so the game has really sort of changed in the last 3 to 5 years for those technologies.
Solar energy has been around for a really long time. Solar power essentially just comes from what we call photovoltaics, or PVs. People call them panels, some people call them modules. They essentially take the energy and photons from the light, and they're able to convert that into electrical energy in order to be able to be used through our electricity system. The technology behind the panels themselves and the silicone in the panels is fairly complex, but you're basically using photons to activate electrons to become electricity. And it turns up in our homes, and without even thinking about it, we power a whole bunch of stuff in a very efficient manner, actually. But it never really saw its cost come down dramatically in terms of the technology until we saw some leading jurisdictions decide to really push its uptake across our economy. So Germany was a leader on that. Ontario was certainly a leader on that. And what that did was it brought the technology to scale. It made a stronger incentive for innovation, for increasing the efficiencies of solar. And now we're at a point that in a very short period of time, solar power is often, depending on the market, the most economic option for electricity production.
the private sector now is interested in developing these projects. And that's happening increasingly also through contracts directly with off-takers.
A lot of people might be surprised to know that some of the largest developers of renewable energy in Canada are also oil sands companies or oil and gas extraction companies.
It's starting, right? It's out there, it's being done. And companies are putting money into it. They're investing in solar farms so that they can write that off against their own carbon emissions.
We can be an energy province and make sure that we get economic opportunities across a bunch of different energy options. In the circumstance that we find ourselves in right now, I think we need to take more control of our own destiny and find ways to have other options through diversification, including outside of energy, but also including with energy, and that means renewables.
Okay, so we are at the east end of phase 2 of the Origin Industrial Park. When all of the lots are built, they'll be put up for sale. It'll be general mixed industrial commercial use. I always start my meetings with a safety moment. This morning's safety moment is about ground disturbance because there will be a lot of ground disturbance out here over the course of the project.
Great.
I've got such a great group of people together. We all have, good sense of humor. Everyone's been working hard. So yeah, I love it. Actually, I look forward to coming out here every day. Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, I'll see you in a bit.
Cool.
Okay, have a good day. I started my staffing agency that I own 100% in 2018. Unfortunately, there's no market for my agency in 2018, 2019, so we kind of diversified and branched out doing other things. There's a pretty big player in the construction industry. I've been pursuing them for years, just trying to get a shot at supplying staff to any of their projects, and they've been very hard to infiltrate. They're building a solar project, and they approached me looking for heavy equipment operators. And while I usually have a really big Rolodex full of people looking to go to work, the common fear is that the project's short term, that it will disturb their CERB qualification. So they're worried about jeopardizing it over a project that may only last 3 weeks to a month. So I can see their struggle. I've never really had a problem trying to fill positions, especially with heavy equipment operators. I'm thinking that, it's very reasonable for that major company to have staffing problems, because me as an agency, I think that I'll have a few problems too trying to fit the bill. Right now, I think just the little one-offs, the small solar fields, they're not really consistent and steady employment right now for people, so everyone's kind of shying away.
Really, there's not that many jobs once you've got the farms built. You're going to have some people go around checking them, but it's not a big employment aspect. The big area of concern, of course, remains the affected coal communities. Most of these places, you have the power plant, you also have the mine in that area, and the whole town is really built around the employment there. And while most of those are converting to natural gas, so you're going to get some employment come out from that, it's nothing close to the level of employment you get both at a coal power plant as well as the mine. So dealing with the affected communities is really the pressing issue, and the Alberta government and the federal government have been working on that over the past few years, and I think that needs to remain the focus, that you support these communities as their main livelihood. Both the mainstay of the town moves away, but then all of the ancillary employment and the ancillary businesses that just go around with that.
It's been actually a pretty exciting shift. That's part of being Albertan, is being able to pivot and shift and grow and evolve and change with the economy, with the oil market. It's really what I enjoy doing, because I love seeing people be successful, happy, healthy. Oh, she's really soft there.
Really soft.
Yeah. How's it going? That she looks good.
Yeah, she's just freshly topped. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah,
Should be the last one for up here.
yeah. And then you guys are going to seed this, level it and seed it?
Yep.
Patricia and I started kind of brainstorming about where to take our businesses because we were struggling with getting contracts in the oil field. And so we were talking about renewables, and I think before January or February of this year. When COVID hit, March, April was kind of just survival. 4 kids at home, the world is ending. We just had to survive. I think everything got put on hold at that point. My husband's an arborist by trade, which has been great in Alberta. It's good to have something to fall back on. When the economy takes a dip, he has that trade to come back to. I hope that we'll see more of this and we can hopefully get out of the roller coaster of the oil fields.
When you think about renewable power, one of the things that people bring up all the time is, well, you know, there's times when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And in some ways that's a red herring, but in other ways, especially for a province like Alberta, it matters a lot. Our electricity system is somewhat unique in North America in that we use more power in the winter than in the summer. And our peak electricity hour is, you know, sometime around supper time, usually in the first or second week of January. You know, you don't have to have lived in Alberta for very long to think, what does the sun do at 6 p.m. in January? I'll use my own house as an example. So we've got a solar power system on our house. We're basically net zero through the year, but we generate, what are we, probably 40% short in the winters and then 40% over in the summers. To take our house from net zero through the course of the year to off the grid would be a massive investment in batteries. It would be hundreds of thousands of dollars in batteries, if not more, to actually just be able to move power from May to December.
The one thing that we always have to be aware of is that all kinds of energy use has impacts, right? And so there is, you know, there's no source of energy that is going to have no impact. With solar, you obviously can have a larger land space utilized, and so it's important to be thoughtful about, you know, where that's put. You obviously don't want to put it, you know, smack in the middle of prime agricultural land. You know, in a place like Alberta, we have the benefit of having a lot of land, and so we do have areas that are more marginal. They may be areas that are sort of a funny corner of a piece of land, or land that for other reasons is not great from an agricultural standpoint.
Definitely one of the issues that people bring up with wind is impacts on wildlife, particularly birds and bats. They do hit wind turbines, it happens. At the same time, you need to take that data, compare it to what other ecological impacts do the same wildlife get hurt by, and compare those scales. You know, birds get killed by an order of magnitude more by domestic cats, or just your bay windows, or power lines, or cars, for example. There's been a lot of studies about impacts on health from wind turbines. They're big machines, sometimes they're audible, and they can annoy people, and that can cause stress, and that stress can lead to other problems. But inherently, the health impacts would be an order of magnitude lower than air pollution or other types of things that we see all the time. I don't want to minimize it. You need to recognize it. You need to manage it, but at the same time, broadly speaking, you need to contextualize it with any other option that you might have.
So right now I'm looking at the Three Nations Energy website, which is the 3 different indigenous groups of the Fort Chipewyan area. So this community has been engaged with Green Planet Energy Analytics to come up with a community energy plan. And this could mean sustainable food production, installing solar, converting from diesel power, using wood pellet stoves instead, just all kinds of different sustainable solutions for the community. I'm really excited to work on this project because it's just such a diverse group of projects all in one. Well, I gotta say, coming from Nova Scotia, I didn't really know where I was gonna end up. I probably thought I was gonna stay there, to be honest. But at the same time, yeah, I couldn't have predicted this in my wildest dreams, but I'm really excited to have a career that I can see a bright future in. I'm from a small town in Nova Scotia called Stewiacke, Nova Scotia. It's a town of about 2,000 people. I finished up a university degree in Halifax, and my buddy and I didn't know what to do with our lives, so we knew life was good in Alberta, and so we packed up his Volkswagen and we just drove out calling everybody we knew. So that's kind of how I ended up in Alberta. I heard about a position in Fort McMurray. I found some work in oil and gas. It was very exciting. I got there just as they're building a brand new plant, and my girlfriend and I moved up there at the time. We got engaged while we were in Fort McMurray, and so lots of good things happened in Fort McMurray, but we decided we needed some opportunities elsewhere eventually. So I really wanted to go back to school, and I realized that I really enjoyed working in the energy industry. However, I saw lots of opportunity to work more in sustainability, as I saw that's the way the industry's going, right? And that's the way the world's going. And I watched a lot of my fellow coworkers get laid off time after time, and started making me nervous. So I realized I had a plan for the future. So shortly after I finished up my master's degree at the University of Calgary, I started applying to jobs, and I was lucky enough to get on with an organization called Green Learning Canada. And through that experience, I actually got in touch with an organization called Green Planet Energy Analytics. I'll be starting this new position next week, actually. I really value stability. I've seen so many families be challenged by the ups and downs of the fossil fuel industry, and realistically, I don't think that's ever going to change. It's the nature, it's always been for as long as I've heard. It's just the way it is.
We've had our ups and downs for sure, but I think people got used to that. They got used to the boom and bust economy, and they knew that if there was a bust and they got laid off or their wages went down or whatever, that at some point it would come back, because that's the way the oil industry works. And so even when it was really tough, they always look forward to the next boom. They figured it would come back at some time. And I think we're in a different situation now.
Definitely, just being an Albertan, it's impossible to not be touched by the downturn that we've had.
People are scared, and it's very natural, right? I mean, it's sort of you're on the one hand looking at, am I going to have a job? Am I going to be able to provide for my family? What does my future look like?
People who work directly for the industry have been laid off, but more than that, other people as well have been laid off. Like if you're a middle manager in the oil industry, and you hire people to clean your home or garden or whatever, if you get laid off, they get laid off too. But also it means that governments can't depend as much on the oil royalties, and it also means that investors are becoming more and more nervous about investing in the oil and gas industry. Part of that, a big part of that, of course, is the price of oil has gone down for various reasons.
So we're taping this in March 2020, and we just had a big crash in the oil price, well, yesterday really. And it's surrounding the demand shock we're seeing from the coronavirus, but also a price war between the Saudis and Russians. It's just crushing the oil price. So it fell 30% yesterday, $30 oil. And for perspective, the government budgeted $58 oil in their budget, which is only about 3 weeks old now. This matters because so much of the government's revenue relies on that oil price assumption. And every dollar that we're off on that assumption is about $350 million in revenue. Net, we're looking at about a $5 to $6 billion decline in Alberta's finances as compared to the budget if this persists for the whole year.
Even as we go through a moment where things are difficult and we can see struggles, we tend to find a way through that and find opportunities. The oil and gas sector will continue to have demand globally that'll mean some opportunities in that area. At the same time, we have great other resources in this province. We have substantial amounts of sun and wind, which means that we can produce energy.
The orphan well reclamation, that is something that I've been interested in even from before I got into the oil sands. Because I'm from Black Diamond, there's a lot of orphan wells. And I was like, man, if I could just build a company just to go and reclaim those wells. Everybody's like, no, there's no money in it. You'll barely get by. And I'm like, but that's not what it's about. It's about reclaiming damage that has been done and leaving it in better condition for my grandson and his children, like for the future generations. My mother was born in Aklavik, Northwest Territories, so I'm half Inuvialuit. It's really interesting. I just started to learn more about my cultural traditions. We didn't really learn it a lot growing up. My mom was assimilated and she was put into residential schools, so we were raised in southern Alberta. We never went to the Arctic. It's been an interesting few years. I've really had the opportunity to reconnect with family in the Arctic. I spent 4 months in the Arctic. I got to know more about, my cultural traditions. I got to see more people that I was related to that looked like me. Like I could see my nose on people. I could see my cheeks and like the same brown eyes. So it really is an interesting experience, and I'm very proud to be Inuvialuit. I feel like, we're such a small people, like a group of people that oftentimes we get forgotten about, but yeah, it's been great. It's been an incredible experience. A lot of Indigenous and treaty land is affected by abandoned well sites. So in an ideal world, I would like to see treaties work together to build the companies to reclaim the land and do the work and train the technicians so that they can leave a better, not only environmental legacy, but also a positive socioeconomic legacy, right? And leave benefit and capacity in the community.
Well, I began hoping to be a hydrogeologist. I started out university working on a philosophy degree, and then I worked in a bush camp in northern Alberta with 4 guys who had philosophy degrees and thought, what can I do that's more employable? I always liked rocks, and so ended up doing a geology degree. And when it came time to get summer jobs, I couldn't find one in hydrogeology, and so I took one with an oil company. And the rest sort of started to grow from there. I thought maybe some way I can influence the oil industry to be better. And it's a lot easier to do that from the inside. So you understand the problems, the economic and social challenges, and even the cultural factors that make it somewhat risk-averse. Proton's process basically amounts to injection of oxygen into an oil field. It reacts with the oil, a process called oxidation, and there's a lot of peripheral and different reactions that happen, the net result of which is a lot of hydrogen production within the oil field. And the oil field acts as its own pressure vessel for these higher temperature reactions. And then hydrogen floats to the top of the reservoir, where we put a downhole membrane that only allows hydrogen into the wellbore. And then we have a large stream of hydrogen coming to surface. When hydrogen gets used through a fuel cell, the only byproduct is pure water. So if there's an emissions-free end use, if you can also make it in a way that's emissions-free, the whole energy system is then a green, clean way to produce and manage energy and use energy. Hydrogen can be used in many ways, almost anything where hydrocarbons are used as a fuel. For example, heating homes, vehicles, even electrical power generation. Hydrogen can step in and take that place if it's priced competitively. In Europe and Japan and South Korea and many other parts of the world, South America even, you can go fill up your vehicle with hydrogen. But in Canada, there's 1 or 2 fueling stations in Vancouver, and I think there's a couple in Toronto. But everywhere else, and Canada's pretty big, you can't do it, so it's not feasible to buy a hydrogen vehicle here yet. That will change when people understand that it's much less expensive. If you can fuel up your pickup truck for $5 or $6 or $10 of hydrogen instead of $100 of diesel. In the oil and gas industry here, people are looking for ways to enrich themselves and others through unlocking things that haven't been done before. In a way, it's kind of like the energy Silicon Valley or something. We're looking to produce hydrogen in the realm of about 10 cents per kilogram at scale. And that works out to about 70 cents a gigajoule, which is about a third of the cost of natural gas today. It's an exciting time. And then eventually, I think Proton Canada has the resources accessible to it to supply 10% of the world's energy by 2040. So that's our goal. So this is a map of our oil field. What it shows here is the channel of sand that's about 800 meters below the surface. And then this represents the thickness of the channel. And these are the different contour lines showing the thickness of the channel at various spots. And it's a two-dimensional map, and not everybody is used to seeing contour lines. So my dad and I in the garage made this styrofoam model that each contour line has a corresponding styrofoam layer. Each layer represents a thickness of 3 meters in this case. So you can see the thickness and shape of the reservoir using these contour lines, which are in this case represented three-dimensionally. Historically, projects like ours pull oil from the bottom of the reservoir, so nobody really knows what the hydrogen concentration is at the high point. Hydrogen's buoyant and it floats. So this summer we're going to drill a well to the high point of the reservoir and see what we find.
Really actually taking a historical lens and looking at the last time Alberta went through sort of a major crisis around our dominant industry. And that was back in the 70s, and our dominant industry at the time was the oil industry, but it looked very different. It was the conventional oil industry. We were running out of reserves. And so the premier at the time, Peter Lougheed, took a pretty visionary view and said, well, look, this industry that we have, it's very important, obviously, to our economy, and it's going to continue to produce wealth, but we need to invest that wealth into sort of what's going to come next. And what he directed that towards was the development of the in-situ oil sands industry.
They subsidized the oil sands. They were in there making sure that it would be successful in the long term. So there was a lot of public funds went into some of that infrastructure, such as pipelines, but also governments bought shares in those companies, right? So that they would have a leg to stand on.
And so it's a bit of a kind of a funny story in that when we look back on that now, it's tempting to see that as a reinvestment into the industry. But if you go back to the context of that time, it was even called alternative energy at the time. The government basically said, well, we're gonna use the revenue that we are generating from this industry, even if it doesn't have the conventional industry, even if it's not gonna be a growth industry for the next 50 years, it's an important part now, and we're gonna invest in the next. But it took some real leadership, people that are willing, as Lougheed was at the time, to tell some pretty hard truths.
So why can't we do that now? Why shouldn't we be encouraging people who want to do new things, green energy, renewables, IT, any of that kind of thing that will give us a strong future? Why can't we help them along? We need people in leadership positions to say, yeah, this is what we need to do. And possibly we need some kind of government intervention to help some of those industries along. But we should be recognizing at this point, early in the game, the government or the people of Alberta need to get in there and support these industries as they get going.
So I think we have a lot to learn from kind of looking back at the history of the province and how successful we were the last time we were facing a challenge.
I'm working full-time now, getting some new projects on the go, so that's exciting. In Fort Chipewyan, they're actually not connected to the rest of the grid that Alberta's privileged enough to be a part of. So they actually, for many years, have just been relying on diesel power by themselves. ATCO is working in the area, and I believe they have 4 or 5 different diesel generators. Green Planet Energy Analytics helped develop a community energy plan in Fort Chipewyan. They've actually started installing a pretty major solar farm project. It's the largest remote solar farm in Canada. So this project will offset about 20% of their energy demand. No definitive plans yet for me to go up to Fort Chipewyan, but I'm hoping in the near future. It would 100% help my job to be there on the ground, to meet everybody. It's real when you get there. You get to see the technologies that are going in, the different community programs, things like that. So if somebody was trying to transition out of oil and gas, I would just say take any opportunity you can get to just try something new. I don't really think the oil and gas industry is going anywhere. You've got that skill set behind you. At the same time, you've learned a lot while you're working in oil and gas, and you can probably transfer those abilities a lot easier than you think. And you can't find out unless you just try. Applying for different jobs in renewables, agriculture, different industry, there's a lot of options.
You know, I think a lot of the narrative about Alberta is that we are tied to a single industry, that industry is absolutely what the province runs on to the exclusion of all others. I think that a lot of the narrative is around the idea that, you know, we are large emitters and comfortable with large amounts of pollution. The fact is, you know, if you're from Alberta, if you've been here a long time, you know that rural Albertans have a really strong ethic to conserve their land. You know that we have a very strong association with clean water, clean air, and having our parks be well protected and well maintained. It's far too simple of a narrative, and to some extent we've seen it kind of imposed on us from other places in the country, but also globally. But then we've also, in too many ways, played into that as well and accepted it.
Well, because it's part of people's identity, right? It really is. Like, it's hard. I think that's really hard for people outside Alberta to understand. And you have generations of people, right, that have worked in the industry, and they've worked here and they've worked all over the world, and they're very proud of it. And they see that as a contribution to the life of the province. And so, yeah, it's all tied up in their identity.
When we say, okay, we need to be transitioning our economy, or we need to move to a low carbon future, you know, that's not, it doesn't mean that people that were, you know, building this province and working in this industry before were somehow, you know, doing the wrong thing. They were doing, you know, the right thing in that time. And so being able to kind of tell a more nuanced story, or have that more nuanced understanding, I think sometimes gets a bit lost.
So when people, you know, start blaming the oil industry for, you know, environmental problems or climate change or everything, a lot of people in Alberta feel that they're being hit personally. They feel that people are criticizing them personally for their involvement in the industry, right? Because people identify so much with it. It's like having your favorite football team or whatever. People identify that way.
There is that feeling that supporting, say, renewables is perhaps anti-oil and gas, or hurting the oil and gas economy. And there's areas of overlap, but there's a whole large element of oil and oil products that aren't in competition with renewables. So the whole petrochemical side of things.
There's still a real demand for oil. People are still driving cars that are fueled by gasoline. We still need all kinds of plastics, and we will for a long time, and they depend on petroleum products.
It's kind of getting over that challenge of self-identifying as a single industry province and recognizing that industry is going to continue to be an important part of the province's future, but we need to also look at what other options we have to kind of maintain more stability in our economic development.
I do feel that every municipality, every council makes decisions for their future, for their community's future, and they're not always about black ink. They can say, well, instead of investing this money here, we could invest in our future and reduce our environmental footprint, reduce the cost of electricity to our own residents, and really become a sustainable community. It doesn't have to be net zero. They could be, I'll just put my large theater or ice arena or recreational facility or whatever that is. They all have an opportunity to have their part and play their part. And I think if they sit back and look at it, the future is incredibly opportunistic and bright when it comes to solar electricity. I'd like to think that our story isn't finished yet. I think that there's a number of other opportunities that I believe that Raymond could take advantage of. You know, we didn't anticipate the outcome that this has achieved. We're an energy community now. We're excited for our future, and we're really excited to see the impact that this, but maybe more projects will have for our community down the road.
I think we're well positioned, in particular in Alberta, to take advantage of the resources that we have, to take advantage of the know-how that we have.
Can you imagine if Western Canada supplied 10% of the world's energy? What does that do for the Canadian economy if we're a clean energy superpower? I think there needs to be some attempt toward this on a bigger scale than what we can afford to do on our own.
One of the big things that people need to be doing is just talking about the issue and recognizing that it's real, and just having a public conversation about where are we going to go from here? How does Alberta position itself into the future, and not just pretending that the future is going to look like the past.
The future of Alberta for me really centers on what will be the opportunities for my family, and particularly my kid, going forward. And so all of my family is in this province. It's where our history has been for generations now, and I would like him to have the opportunities that he needs in order to have Alberta be an option to, you know, grow up and get a job and have a good life. His class size needs to not be determined by the global price of oil and what US is doing with shale oil in Pennsylvania or something ridiculous like that. So in order to do that, we need to have that greater complement of economic diversity, and that can come from a variety of industries, and we need to grow those industries and foster them in much the same way that our oil industry has been fostered in previous decades.
I'm really excited to get up there and actually meet the people of Fort Chipewyan. So I'm just excited to get there and see their lifestyle, see how I can help, see what I can learn, and that's the biggest thing for me. And just seeing all these renewable technologies be implemented, seeing the costs come down, accessibility increase. I just see a really bright future, and I just see this as being the start of a really big wave that's necessary.
And when we take that mindset and that approach, we can grow something for the long term that is going to mean economic development and, you know, good education and healthcare for our entire province for decades and decades to come.
Wherever I am, whether it's, you know, in the Arctic, in Eastern Canada, overseas, wherever I am in the world, when I think of home or when I get homesick, this is what I think about here, and this is what I see in my heart. So there's Black Diamond. Just over this hill is Turner Valley, and that's where they first found oil in Canada. And so as you can imagine, there was a lot of drilling activity throughout the years. Ideally for the orphan wells, it would be nice to see them properly reclaimed, and if possible, if the location is right, repurpose the land for another form of energy, because we're borrowing it from our future generations. My grandson's grandchildren will be raised here, and it's so important that as stewards of the land that we take proper care of it and try to get it back to as optimal condition as we can. We respect and cherish what we have here in Alberta. I mean, look at it. It's incredible.